The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com weekly sale. What do you mean there's no weekly sale this week? Bonus bucks? You get bonus bucks this week? All right, sure. Now until May 3rd at 10:59, you get 10% back in bonus bucks for every dollar you spend. That's right. Now until May 3rd at 10:59 a.m., everything that you spend, you will get 10% bonus bucks back in store credit directly to your account. Everything, site-wide, doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter what you buy, 10% back in bonus bucks. If for some reason you have not listened to any of the other ads that I have done, I really implore you to check this one out. It's not even really an ad for a sale. Just go to StarCityGames.com, the homepage. Anything you find, 10% back in bonus bucks now through May 3rd at 10:59 a.m. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more. Before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back to the 540, your favorite podcast's favorite podcast about Cube.
Getting meta with the intros now.
I mean, you know, what episode is this? 9? Certainly I haven't gone through all of my material, but I guess we'll find out next week. I am Justin Parnell, half of the 540, so you could say I am the 270 half. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter. And the other 270, which is Ryan's second favorite number for cubes.
Yeah, 270 I'm sure is a great number. Somebody has likely built that. But yes, I am Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. Great job on the quick maths there with the 270.
Thank you. I definitely did not have that prepared. I was like, uh-oh. I'm splitting this in half. I really got to figure it out. Okay. So we have spent the last several hours talking about Strixhaven, which at this point was a few weeks ago. Last week we took some time to talk about some online cubes that we are recently playing, or recently had played. But now it is time to return to new cards because they, like last year, have decided to link the Commander preconstructed decks alongside Strixhaven, in this case, the Strixhaven schools.
Yes. Yeah, just release on top of release with these products.
It's relentless. I mean, I think that it is probably possible in this day and age, whatever the format is, like honest to God, whatever the format, you could make an entire show where you're just evaluating cards, new cards for any format.
Yeah, I think you could pretty easily do that.
Yeah.
We demonstrated pretty early into our podcast life here that you can spend a lot of hours talking about one set. And that was like base reflections on early reads and some small amount of time thinking about maybe playing with the cards. You can go way deeper than even what we did on a card-to-card basis, too.
For sure, because we haven't even played. At the point we talked about it, we had not played with any of the cards.
Right.
So it's a deep well. Thanks, Wizards, I guess. But gives us stuff to talk about.
I am honestly thankful for the number of product releases with the nature of my current engagement with Magic. Like, I play a little bit of Modern. Clever Lumimancer has gotten my attention. I've been in the leagues on and off, not taking it the most seriously, but when it comes to Cube, one of my favorite things is regularly updating the Cube, so new cards tend to excite me. And maybe I don't love having to track down 2 or 3 cards from a precon deck. The Commander releases are a little bit more tedious to actually acquire cards for, but all the same, they are new cards and they are cool.
Isn't that like, I don't play Magic Online, as it's been noted, but isn't that like a huge thing on Magic Online? That with these supplemental products, that it's just sometimes like a nightmare to get some of the cards, and sometimes they just decide, no, we don't think we're going to put this one on Moto.
They can definitely be weird, but you know, with the Commander stuff, at least it's not Modern legal. That stuff tends to sting Legacy players way more.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing Legacy, you know what you're in for.
Yeah, Legacy is much cheaper altogether to play online than it is to play in paper, but
I would imagine so.
When you're facing down the 50 ticket Hull Breacher, it can feel pretty rough.
Yeah, Legacy is my favorite 60 card format. So, but I've played that format for since it was type 1.5. So
I used to love Legacy, and I think that Legacy and I both changed. I think that it would be difficult for us to find each other again, but I do have a lot of fond memories of slinging brainstorms.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, good news. You're still doing that, and that will apparently never go away.
True.
But we're not here to talk about Brainstorm, a card that is not very good in Cube. And we're not going to discuss that. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, just leave it be.
But instead, we are going to talk about Commander 21 and kind of just overall looking at supplemental products for Cube, because like we've had historically, there have been a lot of hits, not just hits, but also like historically great Cube cards that have come out of supplemental products like these.
Yeah. We were just talking about the expense of playing Legacy digitally. I mean, a card that caused me to buy 3 copies of a Commander Precon through the Magic Online store was True Name Nemesis. Another like historically powerful Cube card. They print some stuff. Some of the mechanics in these Commander releases will say, you know, commanders you control, etc., and they really call out multiplayer. But then some of the mechanics, they say choose an opponent, and they tend to actually be more powerful when you only have one opponent.
Yeah, there was a Grand Prix DC. It was Legacy, and this was the first Legacy Grand Prix that True Name Nemesis was legal, and it warped the entire format for that event, not necessarily because of its power level, but because of its accessibility. Mm-hmm. Because the Commander set had just come out, and the only way to get it was to find these precons. So if your LGS sold out of their allocation to people that the card was intended for, Commander players, and you were a Legacy player and you wanted to play True Name Nemesis, that was the only way to do it. So people would scrounge Walmart. It actually wasn't even available in like other big box stores. It was really just Walmart then. So you just go all around. And I remember on our way, I was not working. I did not work this event, but some of my staff worked the event, and we stopped every single Walmart on the way to try to find the Grixis 2013 preconstructed deck, which was just, we found a few of them, but True Name Nemesis got up to like $80 on the weekend, which is crazy because the preconstructed deck was $35. So even though Magic Online takes the brunt of it, every once in a while, something like this breaks out and causes, I don't know, an uproar, so to speak. But I don't even really like True Night Nemesis and Cube.
Well, it's not
That's
fun.
not here nor there. It's not fun. It's not fun. But I cannot deny its historical impact on the format.
Yes. Yeah, it's a card that I will put in very high-powered cubes, and it's kind of funny because it sort of supports creature decks in the sense that if you're trying to beat down, True Nemesis is one of the best 3-mana creatures you can cast, but then it's also a really good card for a control deck to cast against a creature deck because it blocks everything. So really, it's just like the bar to wanting to play this card is just high-powered garbage. Like, you want to be doing high-powered things is the only way to justify it.
If the hero of your cube is always the deck that is attacking another player, then that is where True Nemesis is probably appropriate and not as unfun as it might normally be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of other really fun cards that have come out in supplemental products that are like honest to God staples for Cube.
Mm-hmm. So you said fun card. One that immediately comes to mind is not necessarily fun. I guess casting it can be kind of fun, but just one of the actual just most powerful cube cards of all time, the most powerful blue and white card, Fractured Identity. Blue and a white, 3 sorcery, exile a permanent. Each of that permanent's controllers gets a token copy of it. So that's one of those cards that I guess it doesn't just get more powerful, heads up. Like, there's some value, I guess, to giving your opponents things, that whole commander politic sort of business going down. But just that control magic sort of thing where your opponent, even if they answer it, they can't get the card back. They can't even put it into their graveyard and reanimate it to get it back that way. Just cleanly answering anything and getting your own copy of it. Just a huge swingy card that was it was a Commander 2017.
Yes. Yeah. I think Fractured Identity is fun. It's powerful, but I think it's on the right side of fun for its power level.
Yeah,
but I think it is.
When you're losing to Fractured Identity and Vintage Cube, you at least know that it was kind of your fault.
Exactly. Let me tell you, the card a card we talked about last week, but I have seen people lose to their own opposition from getting Fractured Identity more times than I can count on a single hand. And there's never a time. Everyone is always upset, and it's just like, well, you were trying to opposition them, so.
Yeah, that is sweet justice. I do like that a lot, actually.
Yes, my favorite was empty board, end of turn, kills a creature, untap Fractured Identity. The person who previously had the opposition does something, and then the person that cast Fractured Identity untaps and casts Elspeth Sun's Champion as the blue-white control deck, and then that was all she wrote.
The games do have a way of ending abruptly.
Another card. Really, I'm going to do this as a group of cards that I feel like to me are like cube staples now. Are two of the confluences: Mystic Confluence and Fire Confluence. Mystic Confluence more so than Fire Confluence, but I think Fire Confluence is great, so I really love that card. But both of those cards, Mystic Confluence, often thought in Cube as a sometimes better cryptic command. 3 blue, it's an instant. You choose 3. You can choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell, doesn't matter of the creature, instant, sorcery, whatever. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Bounce a creature to its owner hand, draw a card. This is a card that also came in a commander sealed deck, just like Fiery Confluence. And honestly, there's actually a lot of really great cards that came in commander sealed decks that are like honest to God cube staples. Scavenging Ooze.
Yeah.
Was in that very first commander product.
Reprinted into standard very recently, but the first printing was in that first commander deck.
Yeah. My personal favorite of all of the cards that have been printed in Commander for Cube is actually none of those. And it's a shame this card has only been printed one time. I'm still holding out hope that it will be reprinted again.
Is it a Theomancer?
Is a Theomancer.
Nice.
Yes. Love a Theomancer so much. And to me, this is a Cube staple because I think this card is absolutely phenomenal. And it doesn't always make it in the highest power cubes, but I think it should.
Well, you were saying last week how you always keep Goblin Bombardment in your cube. So that
Exactly.
clued me into some other things that you probably like.
Yeah. There's a bunch of great token makers. Hornet Queen was originally in a Commander product. Let's see.
Toxic Deluge, a big
Toxic.
one.
Yeah, actually, I think we may have forgotten the biggest, honestly, the biggest one of all. This is not from a Commander product. It's from Plane Chase.
I mean, the card that I'm thinking of is like the Cascade. Is it from the Cascade deck?
No.
Or you got something different?
Well,
okay.
It is, but it's not Shardless Agent.
Is it Baleful Strix? Yeah.
Yeah, Baleful Strix originally in a Plane Chase deck.
Yeah, I forget that one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a long and storied history of really great cards that come out of these supplemental products. And those are just the pre-constructed decks. There's, we haven't even gotten to like talking about supplemental booster pack products. Notably, there's I think like a group of 4 that I think are the big ones, which are the 2 conspiracy sets, Battle Bond, and then Modern Horizons.
Mm-hmm. And these are ones, Modern Horizons gets the most attention from the crowds that I run with. So Cube is like very much a casual format. Some people get real competitive about it. And specifically, the Vintage Cube on Magic Online, part of the reason that that's the most played cube, obviously they release it the most, but I think it has the most broad appeal because you can do a casual thing, or competitive players get to do really busted stuff and they like the idea of breaking that down. And so the people that I cube with tend to be on the more competitive side of things. So they keep up on the standard releases, keep up on Modern Horizons. But it's pretty common if I put a card from Conspiracy or Battle Bond in a cube that they've never heard of it. My favorite card that I have in one of my cubes that shows up, people read it, they say, I've never seen this card before. They play it and they love it upon first playing it, is Azra Oddsmaker from Battle Bond.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a weird creature type. These guys are like only in Battle Bond, whatever plane that takes place on. They're similar to Tieflings, but they're not the same. But
they're just Azras. That's their creature type.
Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But Azra Oddsmaker is
go ahead.
Yeah, pretty unique effect. 1 black-red for a 3/3 Azra Warrior. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may discard a card. If you do, choose a creature. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player this turn, you draw 2 cards. So it kind of does really both things that you want to do to facilitate a proper Madness deck. You have a discard outlet and you avoid to draw extra cards. And the body is just like really solid on its own.
Yeah, because it can target itself. If you don't have no other creatures, you're just like a 3/3 for 3 that's going to draw a card when it hits. Well, technically draw 2 cards. Obviously, discarding a card and drawing 2 is more powerful than just drawing 1, so it's a pretty powerful effect for that card. But Azra Oddsmaker, that's got to be, I would say, of all of the cards, that is certainly the one that is the least heralded by leaps and bounds.
Of the ones we just discussed? Yeah, I mean, again, when I show it to my friends, that's the first time they've ever seen it, so.
Yeah, I think, and we're getting ready to, at some point in the near future, in the next couple of months, we're going to be spending some amount of time inevitably on Modern Horizons 2, because I don't really think it's crazy to say that Modern Horizons 1 might be the single most impactful set for cubes at all level outside of like Alpha. And I know that sounds crazy, but I think that just might be true.
I mean, you like to talk about how you love Time Spiral, and a lot of that is the quirkiness, combining mechanics that combine in unique and powerful ways that you wouldn't normally see together. Modern Horizons is doing the same thing, but with a deliberately very pushed power level.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, every single cube got a massive upgrade from Pauper, Peasant, like custom cube environments, even like multiplayer cubes, and obviously traditional cubes. There's just a ton of stuff. So we're going to kind of set that aside when we're talking about these, because that's because like Ryan said, deliberately pushed power level. It is inconsistent with some of these other multiplayer-centric products, because that's a supplemental set, but like Conspiracy, Battle Bond, Commander, Plane Chase. Those are all like multiplayer-centric products that just happen to have a handful of solid, excellent two-player cards.
And it's the case with the competitive releases, every constructed format from standard backwards. There's a lot of opportunities to play these cards in a lot of different contexts. It's usually okay. I mean, it's always okay to miss cards, you know, like you don't have to know every card in Magic, but you might not find one that you would end up loving if you don't spend some time with the full set list, looking over the commander decks and the battle bonds and the conspiracies. Like, if I wasn't in the trenches looking around myself, I would never have found the card Azra Oddsmaker, whereas a lot of these other cards from Modern Horizons, a lot of them have just seen play. Maybe some of them have been banned in Modern Legacy, etc. So those cards are just more likely to show up somewhere where they'll get your attention later, whereas the conspiracy and the battle bond stuff might fade into obscurity if you're not looking for it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, those sets have, as more sets come out, we were talking about like the frequency that sets come out. Each set, when it comes out, has the time from when it releases until the time that they start previews for the next set, where that's the set. That's the set where the Magic collective world is focused on, and especially now, it actually doesn't matter a ton what format people are playing. You're going to be aware of those cards. But as soon as that next set starts getting previewed, then the thought of all of the cards that came in that previous set are out the window. And usually with the supplemental sets, their life cycle is so much shorter because they're not geared towards everyone, that there's a very, very short amount of time. Sometimes it's like 4 weeks where that's the thing that's on the forefront of everyone's mind. And then after that, just like Ryan said, it kind of fades into obscurity, and you have to go looking, and you have to know what you're looking for in some cases to be able to uncover the Azra Oddsmaker gems and the like. I know another card. This is from I think Commander 2017. This is one that Usman Jamil, who does previously Cube content for Star City Games, now does it for Cool Stuff. Heirloom Blade is like his big go-to that
he loves that about. Card.
He does, but it's honest to God a great card. I've added that in my cube after he has gone on and on about it, and that's a card that, like, if you didn't have a person that was like championing that card, like with you bringing up Azra Oddsmaker, that people would generally not know that exists.
Mm-hmm. It has one of those keywords that doesn't show up in two-player competitive Magic too, right? Or am I thinking, what's the Oracle text in Heirloom Blade?
Heirloom Blade is a artifact equipment for 3 mana, and it gives a creature +3/+1 with an equip cost of 1. When equipped creature dies, you reveal cards from the top of your library. I'm trying to do this from memory. You reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card that has the same creature type as the creature that died. If you do, put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order.
In a random order.
I got that right.
You got it mostly right.
Oh my
pulled
God,
up
random
the card.
order? Oh my God.
That's an unfortunate spot. You didn't quite stick the landing, but that was good.
Gosh.
For some reason,
9.5.
In my brain, I thought that I conflated it with a different equipment that had Myriad. But yeah, this card, a lot of people don't necessarily explore it because their cube isn't tribal, but something that Usman will say about the card is more creatures share types than you probably think at a glance.
Unless it's Azra Oddsmaker, but even then you might find another
it's
warrior.
It's a warrior. Yeah, there's plenty of warriors.
There are a lot of warriors. But yes, that is definitely the case, is that there are a lot of creatures, especially good creatures, that often share creature types. And again, you don't need to have like all of your creatures share the same creature type. You need like 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to draw you a card every time, +3/+1, and when a creature dies, it draws you a replacement threat. It's a great card. If you want to find out more about Heirloom Blade and all of its praises, I'm sure Usman will be able to talk your ear off about it. All right. Do we want to get going on talking about this particular commander set?
Yeah, I think it's about time. We actually have quite a few interesting cards to discuss and some nice, just overarching information to relay.
Ah, yes, very much so. Well, in that case, we're going to take our first ad break and be back in just a couple of minutes. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to starcitygames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose store credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it all in a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. With the fastest turnaround time in the industry, get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier. Now, Ryan, I don't know about you, but I've had the chance to play with some of these cards, not in a cube setting, but in a commander setting, because I've played with and against all of these commander precon decks that have come out.
Did you do a commander versus with all of them?
We did, which you can find on starcitygames.com and YouTube, probably right here where you're listening.
Nice. I personally have not played with any of the cards, but I've spent some time thinking about them. A lot of time thinking about them, actually. There's some pretty cool ones.
Yes, there definitely are. And I talked about this on my other podcast, Think Twice, with Stephen Green. And a thing that they've done this year that is different than things that they've done in years past, very specifically for this one, is they have really narrowed down the theme of each of these decks. So oftentimes, in the past, you have a main theme, and then you have two tertiary themes that take up 10 to 20% of the deck each. Usually about 20%, because it's usually 50 or 60% for the main theme. Then you have two separate themes, usually led by two different legendary creatures, so you can kind of if you buy the deck, you can, you're like, oh, I like this theme, I'm going to keep these cards and take this off in this different direction. They didn't really do that this year. Instead, what they did was they had their main theme, which was 90% of the entire deck, and then they had, in some cases, a secondary theme, which was 10%, but it was always a sub-theme of the main theme.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means for Cube is that they went really deep on specific mechanics of cards. And that's always really great because it helps replicate something you might see in a regular set where, we'll say blue-green in, Strixhaven cares about +1/+1 counters. So in this, it cares about copying tokens, but it went really deep on that. So it helps you to take a group of these cards and really kind of create this as an archetype for a portion of your cube, or maybe a 2-color combination, which is something you haven't been able to do with these commander precons before, but with this one, you have a lot more opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that focus is a really good point. Also, these commander releases, they tend to vary pretty wildly in how efficient the effects are, how powerful the cards on the lower side of the mana curve are. And I don't see anything that jumps off the page as oppressively powerful, but there are a lot of cards that definitely give you your mana's worth on the lower side of the curve, which you don't always see in these decks. And whether we're talking about the classically powerful cards that we'll get to later, or even there's a handful of custom cards that you're really going to want a very specific environment for, that I think are really awesome right out of these decks into a number of cubes.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think that is, like we were saying, that is I think that's really one of the biggest differences is that oftentimes you're we did talk about a lot of cards in the the last segment, but those are like spread across the years, and I think that you can isolate a lot more cards that can make it for both the classic, which we'll get to, and then for right now, what we're focusing on is kind of the custom environments, and especially like multiplayer cube environments. And that sounds obvious because you're saying, well, obviously these cards are designed for Commander, so they're going to be really easy to put into a multiplayer cube. Well, yes, but they're more interesting. Scavenging Ooze is great. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm in green, I'm going to take Scavenging Ooze. Right? Like, I don't have to be, like, too much of a specific deck. If I have life gain, oh, that's a nice little bonus. If I have +1/+1 counter, that's a nice little bonus, but it's just a generically great card. And a lot of the cards previously that we've looked at for cubes that have come out of Commander products are, like, generically good cards. In fact, most of the cards we actually talked about are, like, generically good.
Yeah, they're not playing to a theme unless that theme is defeating your opponent in one-on-one combat.
Yeah. But like for the Lorehold deck, this is one that you were talking to me about before we started recording, but you have a card in white that is pretty reasonably powerful, that specifically cares about artifacts and artifact creatures in Lorehold Clockwork Scholar.
Yeah, 2 and a white for a legendary Elephant Artificer. It's a 2/4. So already that body is like reasonable. So if this card delivers you some good text, it's going to be one you want to watch. And prevent all combat damage that be dealt to attacking artifact creatures you control. And whenever one or more artifact creatures enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability only triggers once each turn. So I've seen some comments where people don't like that it only triggers once a turn, but any effect like that could go off multiple times would be attached to a card that costs more mana. And for these heavily thematic decks, it's actually going to be the case where there's more opportunity for cheaper cards to make it into those decks. There are fewer awesome 1, 2, and 3 mana cards for your artifacts matter themes. So getting more stuff that's cheap and then putting on an ability that's reasonable to have on a cheap creature is likely the holes you're trying to fill in your cube. And Lorehold looks like it's going to be awesome in an artifact cube.
Yeah, and like I 100% agree with you, Ryan. I would rather this be printed as is than cost 4 or 5 mana and be able to trigger multiple times a turn. Like it's just so critical because there's a million expensive cards. Like if you're trying to fill your cubes, like the portion of your cube out with like 5 drops, you have a million options. But you really want to be able to have like archetype specific good 3 drops like this, and that's going to be more important than like the top end power level that something with a higher mana value, I believe is the term now, a higher mana value might be able to provide.
Yeah, and the cheaper stuff also it helps you to steer players that wants to play more aggressive strategies into at least a more synergistic direction, where if your cheaper creatures are all just efficient bodies, don't really care about what's going on, it's going to be the case that either your aggressive decks don't look like they're part of the cube. It's just like, okay, well, here's some aggressive creatures to round it out. Yeah. Or they're not playing into the themes, and the themes are just more powerful, and so they just suck anyway.
Yeah, and it's true, and it's also super easy to like fall into that because it takes minimal effort to like create those. So I really like Lorehold, and I like some of the other cards that are like kind of built around that, and specifically in white and red for this Commander product. White and red is the artifacty focus, which is great because it's actually different than what the red and white focus is on Lorehold's lane for Strixhaven, which is mainly like messing with the graveyard and like things entering and leaving the graveyard, which is cool in its own way. But I think for the artifacts, like you have Le Shield and you have something like Dig Site Engineer, which is a 3/3 for 2 and a white. Whenever you cast any artifact spell, you can pay 2 generic mana. If you do, make a 0/0 construct artifact creature with this creature gets +1/+1 for each other artifact, for each total artifact you control. So just stuff like that. And, you know, you can find, it's very easy to find spots for those cards in cubes that even, I don't want to say even a little bit, but like legitimately care about like artifacts as a theme, and not just from a super power level perspective. Like, you don't have to be doing Moxen and Grim Monolith and the like, but just like cool artifacts as a portion of your cube, then those cards are going to be not just good, but like great, and cards that you actually want to draft around.
Yeah, and there's another card from Commander 2021 that actually looks like it would slot really well into one of the cubes we talked about last week. The Nega Cube has both kind of a powered down Reanimator shell, which a lot of cubes actually do this, where you're not trying to reanimate Gristlebrand, you're trying to zombify some like creature with cycling, you know? And Angel of Ruins really fits the bill because that cube both had the Zombify archetype and an artifacts meta archetype. So we have a 7 mana 5/7 Angel. It's an artifact creature for 5 and 2 white. Flying, when Angel of Ruins enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments, and plane cycling. So it's like a card you can just play in a white deck. You know, the 7 mana is maybe a lot. If you're hitting both naturalizes, then it's probably worth it. And you can just plane cycle it, so you have some modality there. And the plane cycling is also what opens it up to play into your Zombify. And that cube also had a couple of the white Zombify effects like Resurrection too, so it just slots very naturally into the white decks.
I love me a Miraculous Recoveries. Yeah, but that's I mean, and this whole, I mean, these, what we're describing is like chock full in these in this commander set. I do think the white cards, fortunately, are probably some of like the most interesting overall for like really specific ones. But my other favorite is the really focus, the really hard focus on life gainy stuff in the black and green commander deck, because you have a ton of like little life gain payoffs. Vein Witch Coven, which is 2 and a black. It has a 3/3 with menace. It says whenever you gain life, you can pay black. If you do, turn target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You just get to cast or raise dead whenever you gain life. Essence Pulse is a sorcery for 3 and a black. Gain 2. Each creature gets -X/-X for extra amount of life you gain this turn. And there's other ones in green, and there's just a bunch of like little life gain payoffs. And I think that is really great for a lower powered cube environment, because life gain on its own generally sucks. So you really want something that you can actually say, oh, I gained life, I get to do this cool thing, and you you can focus on like this tangential life gain, and specifically in like multiplayer cubes, because assembling this combination of cards in the draft for me is, and I know a lot of other people that love specifically the drafting portion, that's like some of the most fun, is trying to put the machine together. So you have access to be able to do that across just a huge swath of cards in black and green with life gain mechanics.
Yeah, and I like the point you said about the life gain decks just getting more cards that are worth playing. You know, building the machine is fun, but it's also more engaging when the tools are just pretty good on their own.
Yeah.
Great example of this is Blossoming Bog Beast. 4 and a green for a 3/3 beast. When Blossoming Bog Beast, great name by the way, when it attacks, you gain 2 life, then creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn. So it's just like an overrunning creature. You could put this in any aggressive green X deck, or if you're trying to push the life gain thing, you create these games where some player is like trying to set the record for most pumps they've gotten from Blossoming Bog Beast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and like you said, it's a reasonable card on its own. Like, if you have no other life gain cards, then this card just like cast an overrun, and you get +2/+2 instead of +3/+3. But otherwise, you just get to cast this for free.
Yeah.
Like, this is for the highest powered cubes, this is never going to make it because it's a 3/3 for 5 that doesn't impact the board until your next turn. But otherwise, if that is not what you're doing, you don't even have to have life gain. And if you do, then this card becomes a monster, like a game-ending monster the first time it attacks.
Also, something that just came to me: if you have a cube and you have a beast theme, and your cube has Ravenous Baloth and Blossoming Bog Beast, I already love your cube.
Yeah, I'm super in. Yeah, that's a good little comment. Look at that little callback all the way to 2003. Make sure we get our beast life gain synergy going.
You got to remember where you came from.
Definitely. I wish I could go back. And I don't mean play a cube that has gone back. I mean wish I could just go back and just experience Magic when Ravenous Baloth was just a terror, just all over the place. You're like, oh god, Ravenous 4, so 4/4 for 4. It can sacrifice itself to gain 4.
I wish I could feel the way I used to feel drafting and playing with the Exalted Angel.
Oh yeah, it's just unbeatable monster. We can't ever go back though.
Nope.
Okay, so what other kind of like little archetypes or focuses do you feel like we're getting out of this?
So there's like a little bit of a sacrifice kind of thing going on. A card that I personally am really into is Feign the Broker, and some of this is just getting more creatures with sacrifice, or there's +1/+1 counters mechanics here to attach to relevant creature types. So this is a 3-mana human. It's 2 and a black for a legendary human warlock, 3/3. Tap, sacrifice a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Tap, remove a counter from a creature you control, create a treasure token. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, create a 2/1 white and black inkling creature token with flying, 3 and a black, untap, Feign the Broker. So there's kind of a machine built into this card. There's actually a lot of text there, but you have
there's a lot of text.
Reasonable body, relevant creature type, a couple different themes you can explore.
Yeah. I mean, it does a million things. So,
and that's the kind of card that reads the loudest to me coming out of these decks. There's just a lot of potential ways to synergize there. And as a baseline, the Commander decks, have you played much Commander Cube?
I've actually never once played a Commander Cube, ironically enough.
Well, we're going to have to figure out a way where we can coordinate that someday when we get into the after times. But I have a friend who maintained a Commander Cube for a couple of years, and the number of cards that it takes to really do it well is outrageous. I'm pretty sure that at the peak, it was like 4,000 or 5,000 cards. And
what?
Yeah, it's out of control. He went deep on this, right?
Jesus.
And like, he loves Boros. So do you know the card Book of Wrath?
I do know the card Book of Wrath, yes.
Yeah,
I've played that in many non-black decks to draw cards.
I assume most of our listeners don't. So I'll give you the cliff notes of Book of Wrath. It's a 6-mana artifact, and you can pay 2 mana and 2 life to draw a card.
Yeah.
I believe that's the long and short of it.
That is the whole text.
Yeah, and it's
that's
just
100%
like
of the text.
A good card to draw cards in your Boros deck. And so just a bunch of cool cards historically, some stuff that's some hidden gems, maybe some cards that other people are less excited about. I love Book of Wrath, but I can believe other people will be less excited about Book of Wrath, but it's a big one for us.
I also love Book of Wrath. I was like one of the most excited people for Erebos, like Erebos God of the Dead, because it's like I always played Book of Wrath in like my black commander decks. Just because I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna, I can gain a bunch of life and then spend it to draw cards. Or my non-black commander decks. Black, I would obviously just play Greed, but yeah. But Book of Wrath, that's the OG. That's the truly never forget where you came from.
Right. And then you get some stuff peppered in from over the years, and a lot of the cards from the Commander precons end up making their way into a cube like that. And honestly, if you just track down a copy of every Commander precon, I'm pretty sure, barring finding a solution for how many Soul Rings you would get, just shuffling them all together and drafting them like a cube would be pretty fun.
Yeah, you're probably right. So my one slam dunk multiplayer cube card for the Commander 21 precon is Cunning Rhetoric. This is not a card that I would put in a 2-player cube, because I think that it's not always going to be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But in a Commander cube, 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever an opponent attacks you and or one of our planeswalkers you control, exile the top card of that player's library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. We spend mana as though mana of any color to cast it. I think that card is super mega awesome and is like that would be like a slam dunk like first pick for me for a Commander cube.
Yeah, I had pretty similar thoughts about that card. Like it a lot for multiplayer, and I think that it comes with some problems that you maybe would not uncover immediately in a 1v1 environment. I imagine players playing that card when it's not good in their deck pretty often.
Yes, yeah. I think it actually in a 1v1 setting, I think that it's a card that is going to be extremely frustrating 100% of the games that it's played, because if you have the card and it's not good, as in your opponent is not attacking you many times over many turns to kill you, it's going to be very frustrating. And when that is not the case and your opponent is attacking you a lot, it's going to be extremely frustrating for your opponent because you have to do very little. And if you have any instant speed removal, it's going to start to seem quite helpless for your opponent to be able to dig out from under the Cunning Rhetoric.
Yeah, another one of those somebody's not having fun cards.
Yeah, exactly. But in multiplayer, I think it's significantly more interesting and the appropriate power level all across the board.
Yeah, I agree.
So, okay. Anything else do you want to talk about before we kind of get into the meat of the new cards for Classic Cubes?
Yeah, I think those are kind of the broad points, and I guess in terms of just evaluating products like this for Classic, there's some mechanics in here. Demonstrate is the example from this product, but we get a lot of mechanics that have multiplayer focus clearly baked into the design of the mechanic. We've mentioned some already over the course of the podcast. Like voting is something that's very different with 2 players versus more than 2 players.
The Monarch,
yes.
if you want to really go to the extreme.
Right. Commanders you control obviously reads very differently if you can or cannot have a commander.
Yes, it turns into flavor text if you cannot.
Right. So demonstrate from this set is when you cast a spell, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. Players may choose new targets for their copies. So that's one of those ones where it's kind of difficult to really understand until you start playing with the individual cards, because it's so different from what you would design in a standard release. You just would not see this card really in a standard match, or this mechanic embraced in a standard set. It wouldn't make much sense. There's not a lot of room for the design. Yeah,
it's not fun to just give your opponent stuff,
right?
And it's like these effects are all pretty good. Like none of the effects are like scry 1 and your opponent gets to scry 1. It's all like, it's notable things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you would see effects similar to this. You would not see it keyworded. I think it's kind of the big difference.
Yeah, you wouldn't see a cycle of these cards.
Mm-hmm. And those are going to be the harder ones to really figure out if you want to try playing with or not with the set. And I think that for me, I have to be a little patient with myself when I try to read through the previews for the Commander precons. Because a lot of the cards, I read it and it's just like, oh, well, obviously I would never want to play with that. And a lot of that is associated with these keywords that are specifically for multiplayer games. And just taking the time to read the cards as much time as it takes to figure out what they actually do in a 2-player environment. Because there is one card with this mechanic that I do think is pretty cool for 2-player cubes, and we'll get to that in the next segment.
Hey, well, it sounds like we need to get to that segment so we can hear which of the demonstrate cards Ryan thinks is good enough for classic cubes. So we're going to take a quick break and then come back and find out exactly what that card is.
Welcome to Dominario's Judgment, a new podcast for Star City Games featuring me, Dom Harvey,
and me, Ari Lax.
covering the ins and outs of Magic's greatest format, from Mirrodin through Modern Horizons.
We'll take you through the latest developments, the best decks, the weirdest decks, and just show you why your pet deck is either unplayable or the next big thing every week, and as every new set hits the format as hard as they have been lately.
And, as a treat, some ban list discussion, including why you will never get Splinter Twin back, and you have to be okay with that.
All right, Ryan, each of us have gone through the 81 Commander 21 cards and have picked out a few that we feel like are really good enough, or maybe almost good enough, at least good enough to explore and test for classic style cubes.
Yeah, worth a shot.
Worth a shot. That's a good way to put it. So what do we want to start? Why don't we just, you go first, and we'll just alternate.
Sure. I suppose that it makes sense to jump right into the card I just teased, so that's still fresh in everyone's mind.
I felt like he was either going to be first or last.
Yeah.
So I was going to let you decide.
Right. I was kind of flipping that coin myself, but let's just give it to him. We have Incarnation Technique, Sorcery for 4 and a black, Demonstrate. So when you cast it, you may copy it. If you do, choose an opponent to also copy it. Mill 5 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is the sort of thing we talked about earlier in the podcast about cubes that have the Zombify kind of reanimate decks. And despite costing 5, this actually seems like an effect that could maybe show up in the Zombify decks, or would sometimes be good enough in higher power reanimate environments as well. Because it sets up and pays off, there's a few cards like this that have been printed where it's like mill some amount of cards you can reanimate. And I think that you will actually copy this card more often than you wouldn't, at least once you have a good idea of what your opponent's deck is doing. Because if you're trying to put large creatures, whether it's Woodfall Primus, Gristlebrand, Inkwell Leviathan, the odds are if you are putting these things on the battlefield for a discount, they're more powerful than the stuff that your opponent's just casting from their hand. And the experience playing a lot of leagues on Magic Online probably makes you think that a mirror match is more common than it is. It's actually pretty typical that there's not more than like 2 cheaty big stuff decks at an actual 8-player cube draft. At least if your cube is designed that way.
Yeah, a league versus a real life cube draft where there's one of every card across every person you're going to play is pretty substantially different.
Right. And so casting this card, having 8 looks at 2 reanimates, you know, maybe you've also already cast like Compulsive Research, Chart a Course.
10, it's 5 cards.
Yeah, 10. You're right. Yeah. For some reason, I thought it was 4.
Huge.
It's even
that's
more.
Yeah, that's like that's a fourth of your deck if you're demonstrating this, which is honestly, that's the biggest thing for me about this card is that it is a quarter of your deck.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also 5 mana, so it's going to be an even larger percentage. It's going to be probably like a third of your deck by the time you get to it.
Definitely. Yeah, so it's a lot of looks, and the odds are you're doing 2 things that are both individually more powerful than the one thing you're giving your opponent. And all that together, like, this is a card I would actually be pretty excited to Dark Ritual out.
Yeah. But I mean, like, honestly, you put this on the list, and I was like, I don't know, I don't think I'm in, but like, literally once I did the math, which is very, very basic math, Mike. But I was like, 10 cards out of 40. Yeah, if you've drafted your deck even halfway competently, this is probably going to get what you want or better.
Yeah, and also when it comes to drafting Reanimator decks, the way that I usually build them is they just have a number of castable creatures. Like you get the Venser, Shaper, Savant in the spread, maybe like Sower of Temptation. I really like having Grave Titan in my Reanimator deck, and so
that's the one I was going to call out. Yeah,
you might not hit the pinnacle, you might not get the best one, but you should get two pretty good things every time.
Yeah, and I think most of the time, I'm trying to think what's the biggest hit that's a reasonable creature that a non-Reanimator deck would have. It's probably a Grave Titan equivalent. Like best case scenario for your opponent, but everything else is going to be a small, efficient creature because that's what cubes are littered with.
It would be pretty unfortunate to run afoul of a Frost Titan, but that does get balanced by the fact that you're looking at potentially two big things coming back.
Yeah. So that's true. Yeah, I've turned around on this card. Did the quick math, and realized that was quite a number of cards.
Yeah, I failed to do the math. I just couldn't even read the right numbers, but even still, I think there was a lot to like, and now it's just 25% better.
Exactly. Okay, so the first card I want to talk about, and this card is definitely one that I'm not like, I don't think this is a slam dunk, but I think this is interesting enough to try because the effect is reasonably powerful, is Keen Duelist. So Keen Duelist is a 2/2 for 1 and a black human wizard. So obviously both excellent creature types on that. At the beginning of your upkeep, you and target opponent each reveal the top card of your library. You each lose life equal to the mana value of the card revealed by the other player. You each put the card you revealed into your hand. So I would never ever say this is better than Dark Confidant, which is my favorite creature in all of Magic. But there's a lot of room between Dark Confidant and things that are also quite good. Now, you are giving your opponent stuff in cards, but presumably, if you have this in your deck, you are more interested in both drawing cards and dealing your opponent damage, which I think in an aggressive black deck comes up a pretty decent amount. Now, the only downside, the downside beyond giving your opponent a card is you have to kind of balance, is my curve really low? Because then I'm not really doing a whole lot of damage to my opponent and I'm potentially taking a lot more. With, do I want to try to get some big hits in by having more of a mid-range deck and including this card in a mid-range deck, which I think is probably the way to go. Or maybe you have this in a Reanimator deck. So you have cards like Incarnation Technique. It lets you draw cards, but also take large chunks out of your opponent's life total. And of course, if you have something like a Sensei's Divining Top, just like with Dark Confidant, this is going to be great. And probably to an even greater degree than Dark Confidant is, because you are able to hit your opponent for the maximum amount of damage every time the upkeep comes around.
This
How do you
one's
feel about
tough
this
to
one?
get my head around.
Yeah.
So I actually, you were kind of going over which deck you would most want to play this card in. I'm kind of on the fence about what kind of deck you most want to play this card against. It seems that it's likely at its best against aggressive decks, because they're likely to deal less damage to you. But then it's also the point that there's a good chance you're just going to trade it away anyway. And it can really bite you against controlling decks. You're likely going to try to have a higher curve or try to get the better of it on average. But this is one that I'm a little cold on, but I could be convinced. I would like to see it in action.
Yeah, and I get that. And honestly, that's where I am. Like, this is a card that I would want to test, because I think that it is somewhat difficult for me to evaluate this on paper without actually putting in some games. But I think that it has an interesting enough ability and a high power potential. It might not come to fruition that that's the case, but I think it has the potential that this is a card I would want to test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also a human. Dig that. Maybe I'll give it a test. Maybe I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. You never know. Could be great. It could suck. It could suck. It could. Totally could. But it's a card I want to try.
All right, so I'm going to go over a card that I think that the floor is convincingly reasonable. It's pretty easy to establish what this card does as a baseline, and that's going to be the reason to try it out. And I'm kind of excited for what the ceiling is, but that's a little bit tougher to pin down. So the card is Cursed Mirror. 2 and a red. It's an artifact that taps for red. 3 mana or mana rock. That shows up in enough cubes. Yeah. You will know by looking at your cube list if you are interested in 3 mana rocks. And this one, as Cursed Mirror enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except it has haste. So how good is that ability? I don't know. But it seems fun. I would easily put this card in a lot of my Frost Titan and Inferno Titan decks, either to ramp my big finishers out or to get an extra shot at them and close the game more quickly that way. Seems really awesome with those kind of cards. This card, I bet it falls a little flat in a number of the games, but it really is just that point that 3 mana rock would show up sometimes, and it can be way more exciting in some spots.
Yeah, I think if you're like, I'm in the market, I have a deck, and I'm in the market for a 2 mana rock. Like, I would play, if this was Fire Diamond, and you're like, I would play Fire Diamond in this deck because I need a Signet type card that just ramps me, artifact-wise. I also have some creatures in the deck, then I think you're immediately in for this card. The floor is low, but it's not like basement level low.
Right.
Like at the worst, it's a 3 mana rock, and that's all that it does. But the ceiling of this is like I mean, I don't know, like I don't even know what the ceiling is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the ceiling probably actually involves copying your opponent's thing.
Yeah, your opponent's Emrakul after they put it into play off of like...
They're like show and tell in Emrakul,
yeah.
and you just kill them.
Yeah, that's the ceiling, I suppose. Is you'd flawless victory them with their own Emrakul they put into play? Yeah, that's probably the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good ceiling. Yeah, but I mean, the fact that you can copy your opponent's stuff and then immediately attack with it. And the thing that I actually like is it's... I like, from an emotional standpoint, that your opponent has no recourse. Because they're just like, if they don't kill the creature then, which is just it's not even going to be a creature, it's going to do its thing for a second and then turn into a mana rock. So it's like, I mean, I guess I just let this happen unless it's going to really kill me. And then, like, I can't even, like, kill the creature that just hit me because now it's just a mana rock. And I did this to myself because I was the one that put this Palace Jailer into play or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, it does seem like a cool card. It's certainly, this is a card that's going to create awesome moments, like, a pretty high percentage of the time, and I am a big fan of those cards, and I think the power level is reasonable enough, too.
The art is also just cool as hell.
Yeah, it's great. I feel like this is like a meme template art.
I have already seen a meme.
Have you?
Yeah, I think Rachel Agnes was the first to market on the Cursed Mirror memes.
There you go. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I like Cursed Mirror. I don't know, what is, like, where do you, if you have this deck, what would you have to have in your draft for you to, like, actively, like, want to draft Cursed Mirror? Not end up with Cursed Mirror. And I don't think it's bad that you have cards that are, like, the bottom 8 picks instead of, like, the first 7 picks. But, like, what's a deck where you're like, I hope Cursed Mirror comes around so I can add this to my deck?
So I touched a little bit last week on how I like blue and red cards, just powerful blue and red cards more than I like drafting blue and red combo decks.
Yeah.
I just win way more with just Mystic Confluence than Splinter Twin. And it's often going to be the case that my Mystic Confluence deck, or just my blue-red deck, you can't always get the Confluence, but you'll play cards like Glorybringer and Thunder Mahel-Kite that are pretty solid. They close the game pretty quickly. Glorybringer can be interactive in a very meaningful way. And Cursed Mirror plays well on both sides of those cards. Either turn 3 Mirror, turn 4 Dragon, or Dragon whenever you get to it, mirror to copy the dragon for a turn. Just any of these decks that are just trying to close the game in some way with 4+ mana creatures, where the mana rock would be useful to get these things online a little bit earlier, or 2-spell a little bit earlier, and then the cards are meaningful to clone for a turn as well.
Yeah. I also like that in those scenarios, especially if you're playing it on 3, you get to play your, like if your opponent had a 3-drop or a 2-drop and they like attacked you with it, you just get to get them for a second, and then you just cast your dragon the next turn. That's great. That's just good. That's good fun. I like this card. The more that we've talked about it, I like it more.
It's very cool.
Yeah. So a card, the next card that I have is a card that reminds me of a card that I think we touched on last week, which was Primordial Mists. This is not quite the same as Primordial Mist, but I think conceptually the impact is similar, and that's Paradox Zone. So Paradox Zone is an enchantment for 4 and a green, and it says it enters the battlefield with a growth counter on it, 1 growth counter. At the beginning of your end step, double the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone, then create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature, put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. So turn 1 when you play this, does cost 5 mana, which is a lot. So probably not for a vintage cube, but still, I think just a traditional cube environment. You get a 2/2. And then the next turn, end of turn, you get a 4/4. And then the end of turn after that, you get an 8/8. And it just keeps going and going and going until someone dies.
Mm-hmm.
Which sounds obvious because that's how games of Magic go. But this is a card where you don't need to do a whole lot else for that inevitability to occur.
That is the traditional stopping point.
It is. Sometimes you got a Charizard thrown in there, but otherwise that's generally how it goes. But it's a card that on its own can win the game without much assistance.
Yeah, totally. And it takes some time, you get going a little slow. 5 mana 2/2. Not the most impressive thing, but it just keeps going over time. No additional mana required. It's an enchantment. We talked about how obnoxious those things are.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot to like about that card.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting one. Again, and that's exactly what I was going to bring up, is the fact that it's an enchantment, so it's more likely to stick around than most other cards.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all I got to say about that one. I think that one's easier to evaluate than some of the other cards we've touched on.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about one that's a little funky. It's not the most powerful card, but what it does is fairly unique, and there's been a couple cards that have very similar effects in these commander precons, and I tend to like them. I haven't really found a way to use any of them in any of my cubes, but I can pretty easily conceive of the game states where these effects would be very useful. The card is Guardian Archon. For 4 and 2 white, you get a 5/5 Archon with flying. As Guardian Archon enters the battlefield, secretly choose an opponent. You really only have one option, so don't make too big a show of it.
Yeah. It is a secret nonetheless. Just to note, just because his name has been mentioned a couple other times on this podcast, Stephen Green hates secrets. He hates
secrets as a part of Magic mechanics, or just secrets?
Secrets overall. He hates secrets. He hates people keeping secrets from him. He's like incensed. And it doesn't have to even be a big secret. Any secret at all, he despises it. And he openly complained about this card when he read it the first time.
I love that. That's useful Stephen Green information.
It is. He hates them. And I really mean he hates them. Okay, anyway, continue.
So, if he wants to appease Stephen Green and reveal your secret, you may reveal the player you chose. You and target permanent you control each gain protection from the chosen player until end of turn. Activate only once. So, if they go for your Guardian Archon, it has a one-shot ability to protect itself. That's nice. If they don't, then this opens up as a 0 mana effect that can protect you from any kill spell. Maybe they come to disenchant your Primordial Mist, and you're ready to give it protection. This also works just like as a fog. You gain protection from the player, which is kind of funky, but 6 mana is a lot. You can see where this card would be useful. And kind of the big thing, 6 mana is this huge threshold in Cube where 6 mana cards really have to be driving forces in your deck. You have to be pretty convinced that what you're doing for 6 mana does some combination of closing the game or is competitive with other threats of a comparable mana cost in the cube. And that's where this card's going to get cut from most cubes. It's not as good as the Titans. It's not as good as Wormcoil Engine, a lot of 6 mana stuff that you would see. But it has interesting applications, and if your power level scaled back a bit, you can start to see it come into play.
Yeah. This is a pretty sweet blink target, too.
Oh, yeah.
For what it's worth. I mean, I know it's like a 6 mana, and like most things are pretty good with that have an ETB on 6 mana, but like, I mean, I think I would rather blink this than like Sun Titan. Like after you've used it, because it's just going to be like infuriating for your opponent to play against.
Yeah, it does those two things, the messing up your opponent's combat and also protecting your permanents from removal spells, are like two effects stapled to the same blink target is pretty powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And heaven forbid your opponent tries to like cast a removal spell while they're attacking you in combat. I'd imagine that's probably not going to happen, but if it does, it will never happen again.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, I'm pretty medium on this card overall, but I do think that this is a fun card. I like my fun cards to be a little cheaper because I want the game to last longer where this interesting effect is taking place, and we have a 5/5 flyer here, so that fun is likely not going to last a super long time.
True.
Which is not a bad thing, but I think that's like you end up having the chance to play this and be like, oh, that was really fun less frequently with something like this, for better or worse. Either way.
Yeah, and
which
part
is
of the
like,
reason I wanted to mention the card, I think that what you're saying is all very true. I think that this is at least an example, even if it doesn't quite get there on power level, of a card that maybe you read as Guardian Archon enters the battlefield, secretly choose an opponent. If you're Stephen Green, you read that line, you stop reading because you're so mad, right? Or
that's true.
If you're designing for a 1v1 environment, you stop reading because secretly choosing an opponent doesn't really make sense. Why would they put that line on a card for a 2-player environment? Yeah. But there's potentially something here worth exploring after that line.
Yeah. It's got a great effect. I mean, it's a wholly unique effect, and I think having, there's something to be said for redundant effects for common stuff, like for basis of colors, like, it's okay to have, rampant growth and Farseek, but for stuff that is like the less, I guess, I don't know the word I'm looking for, like the less like functional glue cards, I really like to have as many unique effects as I can. Redundancy is great, but at some point redundancy starts to take away from fun. So
yeah, the really basic mechanics, the sort of stuff you expect to see in the average game of Magic, you want to see a lot of that. And then you want to diversify the more unique effects, so that just increases replayability. More wild stuff happens more often.
Absolutely. Okay, we're down to our last 2 cards, and I believe these are the 2 best ones.
Yes, yeah. I deliberately saved the card that I think is the best that I added to the list for last.
Yes, the card you are going to talk about, I think, is the second best card.
Ooh.
I think the card I'm going to say is the best card. But I think
that,
we're talking 1A and 1B here.
Yeah, and we'll get down to that. They're good for different reasons.
Yes, yeah. So, all right, so I'll go with my card first. I believe the best card for Cube in Commander 2021 is Pest Infestation. XX green sorcery. Destroy up to X target artifact and or enchantments. Create twice X 1/1 black and green pest. Excuse me, I burped in the middle of that. Pest creature tokens. I must have eaten a pest. When this creature dies, you gain a life. So one, this is a scalable artifact and enchantment destruction spell. That's pretty solid on its own. Two, it makes you pests equal to the amount of mana you put into it -1. So if you pay 5 to destroy 2 artifacts or enchantments, you get 4 pests out of this. Most notably, you can simply cast this on an open board with no artifacts and enchantments, and you can make as much mana as you put into this worth of pests -1.
So this obviously doesn't work for the podcast medium, but you started going over that and my jaw dropped because I was high on this card for being a slightly different, slightly upgraded release the Gremlins. The fact that you can just dump the mana and get tokens no matter how many targets, if you have 0 targets, that is really choice.
Yes. This card is a slam dunk for like every cube. I would snap put this into a vintage cube.
I mean, yeah, the floor is just a card that is a pretty high pick in vintage cube, right? 3 mana, destroy, like naturalize, get 2/2 worth of creature.
Yeah, it's spread across 2 creatures also, which I generally think is more valuable than on a single creature.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to make that true. Equipment, sacrifice outlets, even just the texture of combat can often make that true.
Yeah, I think this card is awesome. I love cards this, like, I truly think this is like ultimately like a cube staple, and a card that I'm happy to draft in almost 100% of green decks. The only reason I'm not saying 100% is because I'm sure someone will think of a type of green deck that I don't want this in, but I cannot think of one, so I'm going to say about 100%. It's great. And when green is your base color, it's great when you're splashing green. It's got a single pip, which Ryan and I always talk about how much we love there.
Oh, yeah.
I think this card is exceptional. And this is my number 1 card. Although Ryan's card, I think, is the number 2.
I agree that my card is the number 2 upon further reflection.
Okay.
Yeah, that card is plainly a home run. I thought it was very good, but slightly, and I mean slightly situational, which was going to be enough for me to hand wave and say that sometimes it doesn't work, but it just always works. So forget about that.
Yeah. Up 2 is that's quite the 5 characters.
Mercy. That is, yeah, that's a very good card.
Yeah, it is strong. It is very, very strong.
Okay.
Now that being said, the card you're getting ready to say, I absolutely love too, and it is my second favorite card.
So get ready for a creature that attacks and blocks. That doesn't really do it justice. But anyway, we have Leilaya, the Blade Reforged. For 2 and a red, you get a 2/2 legendary spirit warrior with haste. When it attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Play, not cast, so you can get lands.
Play. Yeah.
Whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your library, so this ability or any other ability that would do that, and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Leilaya. So it's attacking as a 3/3 haste the turn you cast it. You have to get past, I guess, a stomp from a Bone Crusher Giant to get to the 3/3, but it's going to be very common that you're attacking into no mana on the 3rd turn.
So unplayable in standard, but they only get 1 in cubes. So you're probably safe.
Yeah, you might be able to fade that one.
Yeah.
And if you have this card in your deck, it's very likely that you are the player that has the Bone Crusher Giant.
Yes, probably.
But you
get the cards that cleanly remove this are the cards that you have.
Yeah, pretty commonly. So you get going with the 3/3 haste right away, and then on future turns, it's just this body that gets larger and generates card advantage. Like, this is just the ideal 3-drop for a red aggressive deck.
Yeah, it's awesome. My favorite thing about this card is Leilaya's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to punch. And you're like, whoa, I get cards after that. And they're like, yeah, I don't care whether you play the cards or not.
Yeah.
You can play them, you could not play them, but I am going to get bigger no matter what. As soon as I attack, I'm going to get bigger, and you can do whatever you want with the card. You can play it, not play it. It doesn't even matter. It literally, it's irrelevant.
And these separate clauses, they also make it so, for example, light up the stage puts 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature.
I think it puts one.
Oh, sorry, one. Yeah, one or more. You're right. But it does pump it.
Still, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. Oh, flashback faithless looting, that puts another counter on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's
I don't think that one does, because you exile it. You put it onto the stack and then exile it. That's
Either
a
way,
really,
you're probably right.
Yeah, meaty rules discussion, but I don't believe that flashback does it.
No, you're right. I'm gonna look right now, but you can keep going.
But there are other effects. There's another expressive iteration. We'll put a +1/+1 counter on it. That's one that we were pretty big on, just from the Strixhaven set, the blue and a red sorcery. Look at your top 3 cards. You put one into your hand. You can exile one and cast that till end of turn.
Yep.
So it's like another body that plays in those blue-red tempo decks pretty well too.
And the new classic type of like red cards. So Chandra, Torture Defiance.
Mm-hmm. You
+1 exile a card from your top of your library. You're probably doing pretty good if you go Leilaya. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. The Blade Reforged into Chandra. You're probably in a pretty good position, I would imagine.
Yes, plays really well in your Scrap Heap Scrounger deck.
Oh yeah.
This one is immediately going into my original, the base model 2-player cube.
Yeah, this card's awesome. Yeah, I'm all about it. All right, well, those are 7 cards. I felt like we definitely had, as we talked about these last few, some really, really great ones, and then some to try to see how they would work, where the power level might be there, but worth a shot.
Yeah, a nice spread, and yeah, maybe you're the type of player who only keeps up with like a Legacy or Vintage Cube. You're only into really generic high power stuff. That's cool and good. If you are into really thematic stuff, this release definitely has more cards for you.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, totally agree. There's some cards in here we didn't talk about, but that are more specific. But like that's why, even if you're someone that doesn't wholly pay much attention to the Commander and multiplayer releases, like Ryan was talking about at the top of the show, I really encourage you to kind of pour over the preview gallery, the spoiler, wherever you're looking at new cards, and really just read through all of these, because I think there is a lot of great stuff, and you will probably find more stuff for your cube if you don't run a traditional cube or a really high powered cube that you find that is going to be a fun or impactful card.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. All right, I think we're pretty much done. We're going to take a quick break and come out and talk about one little thing at the very end before we head out.
Listen up, gamers. Taking a break from the pod to let you know how you can qualify for the Strixhaven Championship. That's right, the SCG Tour Online is back, and we're giving away cash prizes, tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Weekend Qualifier invitations, and Strixhaven Championship invitations. Go to scgtouronline.starcitygames.com for event information. The road to the Strixhaven Championship begins here with the SCG Tour Online.
All right, Ryan, so before we finish up, I kind of wanted to just talk about how you evaluate for these cards, like in these type of products, like going forward, as we see non-traditional sets, supplemental sets, pre-constructed decks come out in the future, because it's been, that's all the time now.
Right. Yeah, they are just kind of always around the corner, and there's a couple broad strokes questions that should pretty quickly determine what you're looking for and what you might find. The first is just, does the theme of the deck overlap with what you want? We mentioned a number of cards that care about artifacts, that some people are going to be really excited for Cube, even though they don't go into the overwhelming majority of cubes. So does the theme match mine? There's more cards for Commander cubes than for more traditional cube environments. I think that much is obvious, but you get into more specific stuff as well, like the life gain theme. That's another thing that's about here. So identify the themes, and then you can see stuff that speaks more loudly to you. And then the other one is kind of just a general thing to be aware of in your cube, is knowing what either the holes are what spots on the mana curve and what colors you're looking to fill, or even just upgrade. Maybe it's not a hole, maybe it's just like there's a color or a card at a certain spot in the mana curve that underperforms relative to the average cube deck. Other colors are getting better stuff for 3 mana, and so you're looking for more or better stuff. And most commonly for most cubes, that means 1, 2, and 3 drops. We touched on that a bit earlier. When it comes to 4, 5, 6, and beyond, ton of options, and a lot of them are just game ending. So there's less room for improvement until we look at heavily thematic cubes, which honestly, you're more likely going to know what you're looking for with that first question. Does it appeal to your theme, less than looking at the mana curve? But for most of us, and why this release is maybe more impactful than a number of the commander decks, is there's more cheap cards with relevant game text.
Yes. Yeah, big time. A thing that so kind of on like looking for the future when these type products come out, a thing that I actually found myself getting in the habit of is when I found cards that I liked, that I'm like, I think this is an interesting card, but maybe there's not enough support for it now, just note it somewhere. Have a spreadsheet or some document where you have a list of those cards that you want to work. And then oftentimes you might come back around and a product like this comes out and they have released a lot of cards that focus on that theme. So you already kind of have a basis of something that you like, and then you're able to build upon it and actually make it an archetype or maybe a part of a 1 or 2 color combination in your cube.
Yeah, your cube bucket list.
Exactly, your cube bucket list.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always those cards, like, that you try and you're like, I really like this card, but like nothing else in the cube like super works with it yet. Just set them aside. Like, chances are with the amount of products that are coming out now, you're going to have a chance for that card to get some buddies and make it back into your cube in a more meaningful way.
Yep, and that I think is just good broadly for cube. I have an example of something like this that is not based on a supplemental release, but I had a friend that had Hondens in his cube a number of years ago from Kamigawa, the original Shrine Cycle, and Justin hates Kamigawa. I love Kamigawa. So
yep, those are both true.
That's the line here at the 540. But I wanted to do Hondens on cube, and they're a little below the power threshold I usually go for. So I was trying to think of more thematic or engaging ways to incorporate them. And then the release of the other shrines in the last core set actually is what lit the fire for me to flesh this out and look at what a cube with all of the shrines would look like.
Now, just to note, I don't specifically hate the Hondens, but I do hate their implementation in Kamigawa as well as the rest of the set. So I do appreciate that because they were like overly expensive and there were only 5 of them and there was like nothing else that interact with them. They did the thing that they were trying to do better in the core set than they did originally.
Yeah, I would love to see, like, the design that I always wanted was something like a vivid land that was a shrine.
Yeah, why not? Like, who cares? Like, for the people that like that, like, they're gonna love that. That's gonna be the best thing ever.
And you might be
people
thinking,
that don't,
that's a lot of words to put on a card. They would never do that. Well, I have some data points.
Well, welcome to Strixhaven.
Suggest the otherwise.
Yeah. I don't think we can go. I think that excuse is now out the way. after Strixhaven, they can never be like, well, we don't like to put too many words on cards.
That design sounds inelegant, and I will say yes.
Yes, it does.
When are you printing it?
Yeah, but I think that's that is my biggest tip is, have and even as you're going through, maybe you have depending on the size of your cube, you like some of these cards that we've talked about, but you're like, I just don't think that for my cube that there's enough that works with the rest of the themes, because sometimes it's difficult when you're doing a very insular and narrow theme to make that work, because then it kind of takes away from the drafting experience, because then is someone drafting the life gain deck? Well, no, then no one's going to pick the life gain cards. And I'm using that example because I think in this case for this commander product, you got more of those cards that are more broadly interesting and available to be drafted and played compared to what they were previously. But sometimes you have these mechanics that you're like, I think this is a great card, or this is a good 2 or 3 cards. It's not quite enough for me to flesh it out in my cube, but I'm going to set these aside for later. And over time, as you go do that, this is, like we've been saying, this is just a really great example for this specific product, how they've gone back and really focused on a number of underserved mechanics and themes where you now have the opportunity to really make some impact in a section of your cube. I'm dropping the mic. That's all I got. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, what you all just said is true. You see these releases where they get to do some stuff that maybe they couldn't find a place for in a standard set. Maybe just makes more sense in this product, and it's going to show up here. And maybe you'd prefer that you could have gotten the standard set, but you're going to miss it if you don't look here, and that's just how it is. So it's always good to keep an eye on these, and a number of these cards from Commander sets, Conspiracy, Battle Bond, they end up adding some pretty cool stuff to Cube.
Definitely. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about Modern Horizons here coming up pretty soon. I'm sure those previews are going to start in about 45 minutes or so.
I am terrified and excited simultaneously.
Yeah, that is exactly how I feel. If you want to subscribe to the 540, and we would really love for you to do so, make sure to hit the subscribe or follow or notifications button on whatever application you're on, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, or your local podcast app. Please leave us a review when you can, if you can. Make it nice. We would like that.
Yeah.
If you don't make it nice, you are ultimately the person that has to sleep with yourself at night, so just know that you may have hurt our feelings. And if that doesn't move the needle for you, then I don't know what else I could possibly say.
It ought to.
If you want to find me on Twitter, you can do so at oh my gosh, that is the other podcast, at jparnell1, and you can find my other podcast, Think Twice, by searching Think Twice MTG on any audio platform, especially the one that you're on right now. And of course, I'm on Commander Versus every Wednesday on StarCityGames.com and YouTube, and stream twice a week at twitch.tv/jparnell.
And you can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. You can find my articles weekly on StarCityGames.com. The podcast launches Thursday. My article generally launches on Wednesday. That's not always the case, but usually you will have read my article for the week before you hear the podcast. This week, I don't know what the article is because we record on Sunday, and it's another one of the Spotlight Cubes. There is a new Spotlight Cube dropping this week, so by the time you hear me say that, you will know what it is and possibly have read my thoughts on it when I break that down this week. And then a couple more of those coming up. Proliferate Cube's coming back. That's one that I've previously written on. That's Emma Handy's cube, and I'll be going over the updates to that one. And then I believe Legacy Cube the week after. So a lot more Cube coming to Magic Online.
Excellent. I'm excited. Not for me to play, but I'll live vicariously through your experience.
The Proliferate Cube was a really cool one. Obviously don't know what the one is for this week, but I really like the gameplay, just kind of on the battlefield, building the machine, the Proliferate Cube. So I am excited for the next few weeks and getting some more Cube online while I wait until I can return to the outside world will be nice.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, that's the 540 for this week. Thank you all very much for listening. We'll catch you next time.